Thank you. I was moving across country, many of you know, recently, and it isn't easy. But one benefit of moving across country is that you have many hours alone in a truck to listen to audiobooks. And one of the books I listened to was called Caste: The Origins of Our Discontents by the Pulitzer Prize and National Humanities Medal winner, Isabel Wilkerson. And we've heard some of what she wrote today, just now. In the prelude today, we heard MLK Jr.'s words, Martin Luther King Jr.'s words, Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s words, talking about segregation during the 60s. He brought up first the idea of caste and that we too have a caste system in this country. And although the state of affairs is somewhat different now, the segregation King talked about, and specifically when he mentioned millions of African Americans living in poverty in the midst of an affluent society, will you lift that from 1965 and dropped into the service today? It resonates just as much. So in this book I listened to, Caste, Isabel Wilkerson also appropriately frames the hierarchical system set up in this country as a caste system. Now, normally when we think of caste, we think of India, or we may even think of South Africa and apartheid, or Nazi Germany and the classification of the Jews. However, we, and especially the privileged class, don't immediately think of our own society as a caste system. But listening to the book, it made so much sense to characterize the classification of human bodies in this country as a caste system. You see, the word racism evokes all the pain, anger, strong emotions, and violence that's tied up with our discriminatory system. The word caste, however, although representing the same tragic societal arrangement forced upon so many over generations, the word caste is more straightforward. It's immediately comprehensible. We can see it. And I am by no means suggesting using caste in lieu of racism in order to make privileged people feel more comfortable with the language of discrimination. That's not what I'm suggesting. I'm suggesting that we add this word to the lexicon. Wilkerson provides a brand new angle, a new word, and actually King provided it first, but Wilkerson elaborates on it, and she frames it, this important reframing that makes our situation so abundantly clear, especially to those unwilling or unable to see it. Now, she talks about caste as infrastructure and race as the metric to determine one's place within that structure of society. And she shocked me in the book when she wrote about how the Nazis studied our system of segregation, Jim Crow, in order to create their own. She described to me in more recent times how government policies, which I already know, of intentional segregation like redlining, mortgage gouging, redistribution of resources such as water and funds for public schools, unequal access to health care, drug and policing policies that target black and brown bodies for incarceration, so many more purposeful policies replaced Jim Crow in a way that was now tolerable even to sympathetic liberal white people while keeping the caste system in place. In fact, the Supreme Court even, over 100 years ago, they decided these policies were not considered badges of servitude, and they sanctioned them, opened the way for legal segregation for millennia, resulting in perpetuation of the caste system. Now, this caste system we have in our country has been in place for so long that, as Wilkerson writes, it is the worn grooves of comforting routines, unthinking expectations, patterns of a social order that have been in place for so long that it looks like the natural order of things. Most of those, probably all of those, privileged people who reap the benefits of this caste system simply don't see it. And as I drove through the sublime landscape of our country listening to this book, and I looked at the towering mountains in Colorado and the fertile earth of Kansas, I thought about the unseen and the precarious fault lines, invisible underneath the ground. And I remembered Wilkinson's metaphor that Martha read about the house we inherit that was part of today's reading. In order to sustain the beauty above, we have a responsibility to fix those unseen cracks if we can. Living our values, our UU values, means educating ourselves about the cracks in our society as well, being accountable for ignoring them and making them worse, and being responsible for repairing them. And listening to all this, I just knew I had to bring up caste as soon as I listened to Wilkerson's books, because if we want to truly live our UU values, we had better start seeing it. And at this point, it's not just a plastering job and fixing a wall. Fortunately, we have to take the entire wall down. We have to restabilize it, put it up again. Now, as I read through the first sermon I wrote, this is the second one, however, I began to think about my job as a minister. My job as a minister is not to give a book report, no matter how fascinating I find the material or how important. And although this was a brand new angle to frame racism and frame our problems, it was an important angle, the members of this community certainly know about the problem of racism. And marginalized populations certainly don't need to hear me, a privileged white man, talking about what they live every day. In fact, in my description of this service, I asked how Unitarian Universalists can help to do away with the caste system and move toward a truly loving, beloved community, which is the theme of this month. And the original sermon I wrote didn't answer that question. What practical steps can anyone take? Well, there's the acquisition of knowledge and understanding. Scholars like Wilkerson share their expertise for this noble and important purpose. There's social justice work, and so many of us do that already. My question, however, wasn't asking what anyone can do. It was asking what Unitarian Universalists can do. What do we have at our disposal that the academic or the social justice volunteer may not? What we have in addition is we, as being members of this faith community, have committed to open room for the sacred as well. Open room, in other words, for life's meaning. To think about that. We bring the spiritual element that's laid out in our principles, the values that we commit our lives to. We're very specific and intentional about the lens through which we educate and through which we volunteer. We are part of this movement, this faith, because those values are a litmus test for all we do. Let me be clear, though. This does not preclude righteous anger. Nobody, especially the privileged, has the right to dictate a reaction to hate and violence to which we cannot even pretend to relate. How one person reacts to that or another is valid. It does not mean but it also doesn't mean we don't fight, and we don't fight hard. What it means is that we are at this service and part of this church because we commit to making sure that that fight aligns with our values, however that looks for each individual. Reverend Mary Safford, who was a founder of the Iowa Sisterhood, which was a group of ministers, women ministers, for 40 years that spread Unitarianism into the rural Midwest. She was succinct, Reverend Safford, when she expressed it this way, quote, "The liberal church today is to be obedient to its heavenly vision. Not only must we proclaim the saving truths we hold, but we must also strive to build up these truths in our own lives and in the lives of others. Although the saving truths of Reverend Safford's church and ours today don't entirely overlap, the sentiment holds well over 100 years later." So I went back, and out of curiosity, I went back to the text to see how Martin Luther King Jr. in his sermon and how Wilkerson in her book might have answered the question of how do we move forward that I asked. And in the excerpt we heard from his sermon, MLK Jr. reminded us of our national commitment in our Declaration of Independence that we hold these truths to be self-evidence. He reminded us that we hold these truths that all people are created equal. He had confidence that one day we will learn this. He too went back to the spiritual, to the importance of the human spirit. Wilkerson too, after her entire book of brilliantly telling us the bad news of caste in a brand new way, of racism in a brand new way, she ended with a final comment that was actually filled with hope. She said, quote, "that any of us manages to create abiding connections across these manufactured divisions," she wrote, "is a testament to the beauty of the human spirit." She too believes in the spirit of humanity. The process of creating an equitable society is not easy or quick. There is no simple what to do next answer. Our caste system will remain for the foreseeable future, but what can you do to start and to continue repairing the cracks. Our principles and our values provide us with the blueprint for living the beauty of the human spirit. Cast off every day by spreading your values, modeling your values, living your values in everything you do. And I